The fighting in the breach has slogged on for the entirety of the battle. A seething mass of bodies, air thick with the smell of sweat, blood, and shit. The dead and dying piled into the trench. Agrippa, Orson, Hubert, and a handful of Cadian chirurgeons have positioned themselves just behind the battle lines. Agrippa has taken charge, directing the Cadians towards those wounded that he believes they can treat, taking on the worst cases for himself. Hubert and Orson ferry back and forth across the battlefield, pulling wounded out of the melee and dragging them back to the triage tent for treatment. As the battle rages on, the fighting at the front line begins to intensify. Svards and Krigars reinforce the conscripts from Dinham, and, as Ter Bjornsson descends upon the battlefield, Berserks begin wading through the melee. The Bold Brotherhood has taken heavy casualties. The Cadian conscripts that make up a large portion of Wigglesworth's army have had to pick up much of the slack. Perrin has them organized into formation, calling out when to push, when to give ground, and when to hold. His voice can be clearly heard over the cries and clangs of battle. Leona is there too, but she's no commander. She roams across the front, sticking into formation wherever the lines begin to falter. When Berserks start hitting the line, she gets into position and joins the spearmen and pikemen trying to hold against them. A few Sons of Victory were held here when the rest were sent to protect the breach in the northern gate. They also press in wherever a Berserk comes through to challenge the lines. The fighting grows ever more intense. Leona is quick and well protected by her Hotland shield and steel mail, but even so she suffers a few hits and digs deep to find the reserves to keep fighting. Her second wind is half spent when all hell breaks loose. A bestial roar splits across the din of battle. A brute of a Berserk leaps across the trench. As he lands, a long chain unfurls, tipped with a huge iron weight, adorned with stubby spikes. The Svards and Krigars give them plenty of room as he begins to whirl the chain around him. Some of the conscripts from Dinham are not so lucky. When the chain passes them, it sends them sprawling in a heap of blood and broken bones, and when he slacks the chain and sends the weight hurling towards the pike line, the result is much the same. The pikemen struggle to stab the Berserk, but his chain has nearly as much reach as a pike, and its unpredictable path makes it difficult for them to deal with. By contrast, Gerd is surprisingly nimble for a man so huge. Most thrusts he simply sidesteps or beats aside, and the few that get through find a hard steel breastplate under his furs. In just a few passes of his chain, the front line is in total disarray. Svards and a couple of Berserks rush through the gaps in defensive formation, rampaging into the Cadian back lines, smashing through the back ranks of footmen. They descend upon the scattered pockets of archers, and the triage tent. A Berserk and two Svards rush the medical personnel. A Svardic warrior is the first to arrive. Orson draws steel and moves to engage him. Hubert hefts his crossbow and plants a poisoned bolt in the guts of the second. But the Berserk rushes forward, unimpeded. Agrippa is elbow-deep in a wounded man, binding wounds, suturing muscle, performing rudimentary surgery. He knows that if he takes the time to stop and fight, the patient will die, but he sees the Berserk charging straight for him. Hands occupied, Agrippa takes a moment to assess the tools around him, and calmly, without missing a stitch, kicks his foot out as hard as he can. An unused stool shoots away from the medical table. His timing is impeccable, as is his aim. The stool catches the Berserk in the legs, causing a tangle that sends the huge man stumbling to the ground. All that momentum isn't easy to stop, and the Berserk grunts in pain as something in his ankle tears under the sudden stress. Agrippa's focus is back to his patient, but he sees the Berserk go down out of the corner of his eye, clucks his tongue disapprovingly, and observes to no one in particular that a torn ligament like that will take a long time to heal. Agrippa's victim struggles to regain his footing, and Hubert dashes in, shattering a vial of eyeburn in the Berserk's face. The Berserk screams in impotent blind fury. He lashes out at Hubert, but the fat monk ducks under the clumsy blows. Hubert maneuvers behind the screaming, raging Berserk. takes 2 needles from the sleeves of his robe and slides them into the back of the Bearsark's neck, almost delicately. The Bearsark grunts, seizes up, and dies, twitching and frothing from the mouth. Back on the battle lines, Gerd didn't follow his fellow Bearsarks. Instead, he moves along the edge of the front line. Everywhere he goes, he tears holes in the defensive lines. Peasants, bold brothers, Cadian knights, even sons of victory crumble beneath his onslaught. Until one figure steps forward from the line. Leona approaches in a low battle stance, back hunched slightly, shield high, spear low. She eyes the Bearsark warily as she advances. The ground around Gerd is clear for a good 20 feet. He needs that room to manage his awkward weapon. But it also means he lacks backup. Not that he needs it for a single Spitalian wench. Leona is huge for a woman, strong for a woman, a good fighter for a woman. Gerd is no woman. He laughs as she leaves her allies behind to face him down alone. He says something in Svardic. The tone is mocking, an insult. Leona gives him a good one in her native tongue. The first time the chain streaks in, Leona drops into a roll, avoiding it entirely, and still she advances. The second time she catches it on her shield. A glancing blow, it goes skittering to the side, but the shock of the impact still rocks painfully through her arm and shoulder. Still, she advances. Gerd chokes up on the chain as she gets closer, swinging with less slack each time. The third blow she dodges, and still advances. As she approaches, Gerd gives ground for the first time since he joined the fight. He shuffles back until his back is to the trench, and there's no more ground to give. He strikes a fourth time before she can close to spear range, catching the shield again, but she manages less of an angle this time. The weight leaves a huge dent and a long scar in the iron shield. Splinters of wood fly off the backing, and Leona's arm goes numb. Still, she advances. Inside his reach now, Gerd is wielding the weight of his right hand like a club, and tries to grab her with his left. She ducks under the swing, feels him grab at her shoulder, and strikes. Leona's got a move she's fond of. She calls it playing the triangle. And never was there a better target than Gerd, towering above her, presenting his target so proudly. She keeps her grip on her spear a little loose, swings it between Gerd's legs, slamming the steel blade into his left knee with all of her strength. Immediately converting the rebounding force into a second blow, clipping his right knee almost as hard, and finishes it by whipping the spear up between the Bearsark's legs, biting the tip into his crotch. Gerd screams in pain, losing his grip on Leona. She twists the spear and drives it deeper. The chain unravels as he drops the iron weight. Gerd wears an iron breastplate and a smattering of mail, but his joints and groin are comparatively unprotected. Gerd is huge, strong, tough, but she just sliced open one kneecap and seriously jeopardized his future chances of fatherhood. Gerd crumples to his knees, groaning in agony. Leona pulls her spear back and goes for a fatal thrust. But he's not done yet. He reaches out with 2 enormous hands, batting her spear aside, grabbing her shield, and wrapping one of those huge fists around her throat. Leona fights for breath, slams the edge of her shield into the Bearsark's face, stabs under his arm with her spear, drives it deep into his armpit. She loses her grip on the spear. Still, he lets go, and she gasps a hoarse breath of air. Gerd sags, blood gushing down his legs, down his breastplate. Leona jerks her short sword from its scabbard and launches herself forward, and drives the sword point through Gerd's throat. He collapses. A cheer ripples through the battle lines. The Cadians surge forward to fill the gaps and press back the attackers. Meanwhile, over at the North Gate, Beck's knights and the Sons of Victory have held the line, driven the Unkar back through the breach. The Unkar are hunters, raiders, not soldiers trained in mass warfare. Reinforcements are coming from Bjornsson's encampment, Svards and Krigars coming to press this advantage. Joran has been in the thick of the fighting. He barks out orders to knights and sons alike. Beck hadn't much liked Steelshod, but at this point he's willing to concede that Joran might know what he's doing. Gwyneth has no problem listening to a good plan when she hears one, so the forces begin gathering rubble from the ruined keep, burnt-out beams from the husks of buildings, chunks of masonry from the smashed church. They pile it all in the remains of the burnt-out gate. Joran tosses an alchemical pot Hubert gave him before the battle began. Stone tar, a quick-acting cement-like substance. After about an hour, stone tar turns brittle and crumbles easily, but until that time it's as hard and unyielding as stone. The stone tar binds much of the rubble together, forming a relatively impenetrable wall. At least for a little while. The Svards and Unkar surge into the blocked gate, but it holds fast. War horns blow again. The masses at the north gate begin withdrawing out of the range of the archers on the walls. Satisfied that the breach in the north has been plugged, Joran rushes to the main battle line, bringing a large portion of the Sons of Victory and Beck's cavalry with him. Alexander and Wigglesworth have come in. Alexander is sitting in the triage tent, teeth clenched, waiting his turn, as Agrippa and 2 assistants work to save Volk's life. Volk is bleeding from a dozen wounds, mostly on his right arm and leg. They are binding, stitching, and extracting the fragments of wood and iron from the wounds. Hubert has helped Leona back from the front line as well. She is hoarse and battered, but she's in good spirits, speaking almost jovially of the whole affair. The sons and the knights reinforce the front lines. In short order, the cluster of Bearsarks that Bjornsson sent down are slain or routed. Word has come from Chatsworth on the southern wall that the Svards have been pushed back. As the rest of Bjornsson's force retreats, the Dynamites are in total disarray, with little in the way of leadership when Svards aren't barking orders at them. Some retreat. Some keep fighting futilely against the Cadian line. Most mill about in confusion, faltering out of melee range but not retreating back to the Spartic encampment. The ballista has run out of bolts, for the time being, and the Cadian archers are instructed to save their arrows. So, the people of Dinham, for the moment anyway, are relatively safe, to simply cower in the gap, in the trench, in the rubble, or in the field. A strange sort of lull descends upon Kilchester. The fighting hasn't fully stopped, but it's slowed so significantly that the Cadians can regroup. Wounds are seen to, ballista bolts are carved, meals are eaten, and the few men fighting in the front lines are cycled out. Alejandra and Martin sit away from the rest of Steelshod, quietly speaking in Spitalian. Martin's cheeks are streaked with tears, but Alejandra's are dry. Her expression is more one of cold fury than grief. By the time night falls, the grinding slog of the battle has slowed even further. Most of the Dynamites are retreated, scattered across the northeastern fields in dozens, even hundreds of haphazard encampments. Further to the north, the remains of the Unkar have been reinforced by more Svards. The southern portion of the army has fallen back to an encampment in the southeast. And far to the northeast, the core of Bjornsson's army is still camped. You could say the Cadians won the first day of the Battle of Kilchester, but they know that the battle is far from won. Come the dawn, the fighting will come again. In the meantime, however, Joran has a plan. After all of this, a day of fighting, the exhilarating victories and the crushing losses, he's pretty sure there's one thing Bjornsson is not going to expect. A night raid. Thank you for tuning in to Steelshod, a series by Mostly Rights, narrated by Tailforge. You can find every chapter in text format as well as character sheets, setting information, maps, and rule documents on the Steelshod tabletop system in the link below. If you'd like to support the channel, you can pop down to the description and use the Patreon link for recurring donations, the paypal.me link for one-time donations, the Teespring link for shirts with the incredibly cool background art by Nobody, or use the DriveThruRPG affiliate link the next time you're looking to try a new system. If you'd like to support the author, you can find Steelshod merch on the mostlyrights.com store, or donate to the Mostly Rights Patreon, which are both linked on reddit.com/r/mostlyrights down below.